Hi, everybody. Amy Davis here with Montana Spine and Pain. Welcome back to Understanding Pain, our online version of our in-person class on working with and coping with persistent pain. This is the third topic, and the topic for today is physical reconditioning with pain, which is both challenging and essential. And once again, I would invite you to, let's just take a moment, first of all, and just take some slow, deep breaths and make sure that as we work together today that we're all in the room and in our bodies as well. So I just invite you to take a few moments and just breathe slowly. Hopefully you're in a comfortable chair or in a couch, or if it's more comfortable for you to stand. So find a position that you can hold comfortably. And I just invite you for a few moments to notice the room that you're in right now. Or maybe you're outside and you're hearing the birds and feeling the sun or feeling the breeze. So wherever you are, just take a moment and just breathe and feel your belly just soften and relax in response to your breath. And just notice what it feels like to just breathe. And if you are seated, just feel the floor underneath your feet and feel the chair or the couch just holding up your weight. And notice what that's like. Sometimes we are not in our bodies by intention or by happenstance, and we don't notice that, sometimes we're tense or we're keyed up and we don't even allow the chair or the couch to actually do its job and just hold our weight. So I invite you just to relax and sit comfortably as you can and breathe and just tune in for a moment to any sounds that you might hear. And just notice the sounds. Maybe it's the sound of your own breath. Maybe it's my voice. Maybe your dog is wondering what you're doing. And just breathe. And then just gently tune your attention to the room that you're in. Just take a look around and notice what's around you. Notice if there's anything near you that has a texture that you like, whether it's the clothes that you're wearing or maybe a blanket on the couch. Just really take a moment to make contact with the room that you're in. And for the next hour or so, as we are engaged in this class, just please know that pausing and stopping and stretching and taking a break, all of that is really welcome. And part of what we talk about and what we know when we're working with pain is that trying to tune in and connect with a body that is suffering, that has pain, that has discomfort, is really, really challenging. So when I'm offering up the invitation for a body scan or the invitation for progressive muscle relaxation or anything like that, knowing that I have tremendous respect for how difficult that can be and that it's not easy. But what we know for both pain and anxiety, avoidance of pain and avoidance of things that are frightening or anxiety provoking, of course, is so human. And there's a lot of evolutionary hardwiring about why that is. And certainly in the short term, avoiding pain makes sense. In the longer term, though, avoidance strategies tend to be less and less helpful. So what we're looking for are gentle approach strategies, not immersion strategies, not overwhelming amounts of activity or overwhelming amounts of exposure to fearful stimuli, but gentle approach strategies. So it can be helpful if we are scanning our body just to quickly check in and be curious about how we're doing, what our energy level is like right now. Are we thirsty? Do we need water? Do we need food? What is actually happening right now in this physical body? It can be easy and also habitual if we're trying not to tune in because we don't want to become more aware of pain. In order to successfully be able to do that, we have to kind of block everything else out. And some of us are more cognitively oriented than others, right? Some of us have worked long and hard on our education and our schooling and developing this thing. And we may, have treated everything below the neck as, well, this body just kind of carries this thing around. So it may not be as familiar to us to be able to really just sink in and connect with the body. Okay, great. So once again, I'm going to share my screen. We'll look at some slides. I'm very excited. There's a TED Talk with Lorimer Moseley, who I know I've mentioned many times as being one of the authors of the Protectometer, as well as Explain Pain and Explain Pain Supercharged, which I've had to read probably about 3 times now to really make sure that I kind of roughly understand it. It's got a lot of great stuff in it. Anyway, so he will, I'll share a TED Talk with him, which is lovely. And as always, I would invite that you keep a notepad nearby, or if you use a computer, whatever your format is for taking notes or learning. If you have a copy of this book, of course, hopefully you're highlighting and scribbling in it. And any questions that you have as we go along, I want you to write down, and hopefully by the end of this time, those questions will be answered. And if not, if you're local in the Missoula area or close by, and if ever you would like to talk about or apply some of these concepts further, you're welcome to reach out for an appointment with one of our physical medicine providers or myself. I'm not here to kind of solicit referrals. That's not what I'm doing. But I want you to know, a lot of these concepts are, by definition, I'm being general to be inclusive. And so the specificity of a lot of this class content would depend on the questions and the responses that we would get together if we were in person. So if there's something that doesn't apply to you, or you're wondering about your particular situation, that can be a good reason to schedule a visit with us. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. Bear with me during the transition into the ozone or wherever we are. And gosh, what did we do before PowerPoint? So this is one of those sections, physical reconditioning, where the whole takeaway is really in the first slide, which I just went too fast over. Gosh, I love that. Okay, motion is lotion. It's really true. This is, again, I think probably one of the most common things that I've heard physical therapists say, and also physicians, about just health and well-being in general, but particularly pain. So there, you've got the main nugget from today. First, though, a cartoon. Let me know if this has ever happened to you, because it's happened to me. One chicken is looking at the other saying, "You look tired." And the first chicken says, "Well, I feel great. At least I did until you told me I looked tired," right? So how much of our, our feeling and our energy and our self-perception, we have that within ourselves, of course, but we are also social creatures, and we change in response to feedback and comments from others. And it's just funny. Not everything has to be analyzed. So, right, motion is lotion, and we're going to spend some time talking about that. And to tell you more about that, I am going to turn over now to about a 14-minute TED Talk from Lorimer Moseley from about 2011. It looks like this was the TED Talk out of Adelaide, Why Things Hurt. So the amazing, very funny, very knowledgeable Lorimer Moseley. Enjoy.
Everyone goes, great, quick nap. Don't have a nap. Raise your hand, just squeeze your left ear as hard as you can. Raise your hand if it hurt. Fantastic. Thanks for having me. No, that's not true. Let me tell you a story. I just want to take that off the screen for the moment. I want to tell you a story that will explain to you the first 3 years of the neurobiology of pain that you would study at university. 8 years ago, I was walking in the bush. I had a sarong on. Very cool. This is what happened. Did you see that? Hang on. This is what happened. Biologically, I'm going to tell you what happened just then. Something touched the outside of my left leg in the skin. That activates receptors on the end of big, fat, myelinated, fast-conducting nerve fibers. And they stream straight up my leg, straight into my spinal cord, up to this part of my brain. And they say, you've just been touched on the outside of your left leg in the skin. Meanwhile, whatever it was is sufficiently intense to activate free nerve endings. We call them nociceptors. They're thin, unmyelinated, slow-conducting LADA neva. Someone knows what a LADA neva is. Nerve fibers. And that message travels up to my spinal cord, and it gets to my spinal cord, and that's as far as it goes. And it says to a fresh neuron in my spinal cord, you've just been, something dangerous has happened on the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. And the spinal nociceptor takes that message up to the thalamus, which sits in there somewhere, and says, there's danger on the outside of your left leg in the skin, mate. Now the brain has to evaluate how dangerous this really is. So it looks at everything. And the way that I make sense of this, of what happened to me, is the brain thought, frontal lobe, have we been anywhere like this before? Hang on, I'll just ask the posterior parietal cortex. Have we been in this environment before? Yes, we have. Has it happened at this stage of the gait cycle? Yes, it has. Is it coming from the same location? Yes, it is. What is it? Well, your whole life growing up, you used to scratch your legs on twigs. This is not dangerous. I'm going to give you, the organism, just something so you can kick off the twig and continue on your merry way. And that's what happened for me. I can't show you now, but I took off my sarong, got in the river, got out of the river, and that's the last thing I remember, having been bitten by an eastern brown snake. Survivor. Thank you very much. Now, for some reason, the eastern brown snake works by poisoning you, clearly. And one of the things that it does is activates nerve fibers. So actually, my brain would have got all these messages saying, danger, 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 danger. And in its wisdom, it said, no, 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 no. 6 months later, I'm walking in the bush with a boring talker. You know what a boring talker is? Those people, it doesn't matter what they say, it's boring. That's irrelevant, but we'll call her Naomi because that is her name. Anyway, this is what happened, right? Oh, whoa! And I am in agony. I have got a white hot poke of pain screaming up my leg. I'll tell you biologically what's happened. Something touched the outside of my left leg in the skin. That activates big, fat, myelinated nerve fibers, which send a message up to here. Just been touched on the outside of your left leg in the skin. It's sufficiently intense to activate these free nerve endings, danger receptors. Take the message to my spinal cord. Just been, something dangerous has happened on the outside of your left leg in the skin. Yes. Well done, you weren't planted. That goes to the thalamus and says the same thing. Something dangerous has just happened on the outside of your left leg in the skin. So the brain says, thanks very much, thalamus. Kids all right? Good. Anyway, frontal cortex, anything to tell me about this? Hang on, I'll ask the posterior parietal cortex. Where are we? We're walking in the bush. Oh. You're a bit mate happy. This stage of the gait cycle, where's it coming from? Have we been here before? Oh, yes, we have. Last time we were here, you almost died. I'm going to make this hurt so much that you can do nothing else. And I was in absolute agony for what seemed like minutes, screaming pain, until one of my mates looked at my leg and there's a little scratch from a twig. The pain in those situations was totally different because of meaning. I want to try and convince you that pain is an illusion 100% of the time. Here's a visual illusion. So if you have a look at this picture, you've got a square that's got A in it and a square that's got B in it. Raise your hand if you think that the square with A in it looks darker than the square with B in it. Thank goodness for that. None of you have a really socially embarrassing neurological disorder, except you. That's not true. But watch what happens if we have another look at this. These are those two squares taken out of that picture. And hopefully you can see that they're identical, and some of you may not believe me, so I'll just put A on top of that, and I'll put B on top of that. And some of you may still not believe me, so why don't we just move A over on top of B, or B over on top of A. No matter how long you look at this, A will look darker than B, because your brain's doing some really groovy stuff, really quickly, outside of your awareness. Have a look at this. Turn your head on the side and have a look at the same picture. Nothing changes. Fantastic, 100% take. So what really happens here, exactly the same frequency is hitting your retina, and that sends a message to the back of the brain. And then all of this groovy stuff happens very quickly to ask the question, what does this really mean? What's biologically advantageous for me? And then you get a visual image. This is a visual illusion. And vision's not about emotion. Vision's not necessarily about survival, but pain is. Now, some of you might not know if you're not medically trained, but what's happening at this guy's leg, right leg, that's not right. It's a dangerous situation. And that danger message arrives at the brain, and the brain has to ask exactly the same question. What does this mean? What should be done here? And hopefully the orchestra in this person's brain will make your leg hurt. In the work that I've been doing for a long time, we're trying our best to work out how do we convince people in pain that we understand they're in pain, but it's not just about the tissues of their body. How do we convince them of that? And a key conceptual shift that we think is really important is that you can understand that pain is the end result. Pain's an output of the brain designed to protect you. It's not something that comes from the tissues of your body. There's nothing there. We show patients a really sharp knife and we say, this knife is sharp, yeah? Yeah. And it might be a bit cold, yeah? And it's hard, it's got all those properties. Is this knife painful as it sits out there? No, it's not. That knife does not have the properties of pain. And when you stick it into their belly, we do this regularly, straight through. The belly doesn't adopt the property of pain. The brain has to do some very rapid and groovy things to project this illusion that pain exists there. 100% of the time, pain is a construct of the brain. We can mess with pain really easily without touching the tissues. This is an experiment we did a while ago where we got supposedly normal, healthy volunteers. They're not normal people because they're volunteering for a pain experiment. But let's say they're reasonably normal, right? And we put a very cold piece of metal on the back of their hand. And we just show them one of two lights. One light is red and one light is blue. We don't tell them anything about the lights. We just show them the light. I see that hand. And we ask them, how much does it hurt? And if they see the red light, it hurts more than if they see the blue light. The stimulus is exactly the same. What's different is the meaning of the stimulus. Now there's a cue that says this is really hot because red means hot. So the sensible brain, the clever brain should say, well, I really don't want you to do it. So I'm going to make it really hurt. These people in the States are allowed to get their psychology students to participate in experiments in exchange for credit points or sex or something. Anyway, they put their head inside what they think is a stimulator for their head, and they make sure that the subject can see the intensity knob. And as they turn up the intensity knob, this picture, the little figure there showing the lines going up at a steady rate, that's their reported head pain, and it matches the intensity knob. But the stimulator's doing nothing. It's just one of those old-fashioned plastic hair dryers that doesn't do anything. Yeah, you know those things? Yeah, you probably use one. Yeah. The trick is that they have to see the intensity knob. And I always think it'd be fun to do an experiment based on that Spinal Tap film where the intensity knob goes up to 11. Remember that film? What's really important from a clinical perspective, and I'm a clinical neuroscientist and I see patients in pain, any piece of credible evidence that they're in danger should change their pain. And they're all walking into hospital departments with models like this on the desk. What does your brain say when it sees a disc that's slipped so far out it's sitting on its own? If you've ever seen a disc in a cadaver, you can't slip the suckers. They're immobile. You can't slip a disc. But that's our language, and it messes with your brain. It cannot not mess with your brain. We can even modulate the location of pain. We can do some groovy things. It's quite well established that referred pain gives you pain in an area of your body that might be physiologically normal. And most of you would have heard of referred pain. Bless you. We do experiments where we give you pain in an artificial limb. It's not even yours. This is Meng, who was a postdoc in my lab in Oxford in the UK, and we stole a prosthetic limb, which is a whole other story, which is really funny, but I won't tell it to you. And we can do this manipulation so that you start to feel like the plastic limb in front of you is yours. And we can make the rubber hand hurt. And we can bring in a knife and run the knife across the rubber hand, and you have your brain responses to protect that rubber hand. You're feeling pain in a lump of plastic, effectively. Here's a groovy experiment where we take two Microsoft clip art people and we put a webcam on the forehead of one of them and a set of virtual reality glasses on the other one. And then we get them to shake hands, and as they're shaking hands, the person on your right, who's wearing the goggles, their visual field is coming from the other person's forehead. Have you got it? So they are effectively looking at the other person thinking it's them because they're shaking hands, the motor command fits, everything's good. And then we come in and put a painful stimulus on that person's arm, and they see it hit the arm of the person over there with whom they're shaking hands. And they say, ouch, it really hurts. And we say, where does it hurt? On that man's arm. And they get it right every time. They point exactly where it is, but if you're an outside taking a photo of that, they're literally, we've got the painful stimulus here, and they're saying, it hurts there. So the brain is not only producing pain, it's projecting it to this location in midair. We can mess with that. This all becomes really important when pain persists, because two things happen when pain persists that make the life of someone in pain really difficult, that cost our country $40 billion a year, cost Australia more than cancer, cardiovascular disease and diabetes combined. Thanks for that facial expression. I wanted someone to go. This is the problem, that if we keep running the neurons, the brain cells that produce pain, they get better at producing pain. They become more and more sensitive, so we need a smaller and smaller influence. The illusion, if you like, in increasing sensitivity becomes very unhelpful. It's trying to protect you from something that's not needing protection. It's very real. The other thing that happens is that all of these networks lose their capacity to be specific and precise. So the pain spreads. The pain changes its quality. Ultimately, it's not even informative. It's both unhelpful and uninformative. Maybe the next TED Talk ever is the really important question, what do we do about it? Who knows? But no, we do know. That's what we're really researching, but that's the end of my 18 minutes. Thank you very much for having me. It was cool.
So hopefully that was informative and also, mildly humorous, but informative of some of the research studies that Lorimer Moseley is doing and working with patients, and just the incredible clinical research studies really looking at, again, pain that persists and that becomes obviously unhelpful and not precise. There are a ton of TED Talks, by the way, from Lorimer Moseley and David Butler, talking about all kinds of concepts and research studies. So I would encourage you to look those up if you like learning through information and lecture along with books. So motion is lotion, which, you know, I think many of us are pretty well in touch with the idea that physical movement and exercise is important for health and well-being. And how does that work, and what does that look like when pain is present and is persistent? So some of the benefits of physical exercise and well-being, again, from the perspective of a clinical psychologist, you know, being physically active throughout the lifespan is what our bodies are really designed to do. I mean, certainly as young children, that is often how we learn, is with physical activity, motor movement, running, tripping, falling, grasping, touching, putting everything in the mouth, climbing. All of those things actually help our brains to develop. Remember neuroplasticity. We learn in response to experiences, and we reorganize based on those experiences. Throughout the lifespan, remaining physically active and keeping the body strong obviously is excellent for physical health. It's also excellent for mental health. We do want strength of muscles, core muscles, stabilizing muscles, muscles that allow us to maintain our function, and also flexibility, to be able to flexibly move our limbs and our joints, be able to lift and carry, be able to do the things that are functional, such as getting up and down off of the floor, getting on and off of the toilet, in and out of the tub, those kinds of things. Exercise, even moderate exercise, also produces endorphins and enkephalins, so the body's endogenous opioids. It also elicits a positive mood. In many cases, exercise, when compared against some antidepressant medication for mild to moderate depression, okay, mild to moderate depression, exercise as an intervention is as beneficial, if not more so, than some medications in those cases. Movement, when we are in pain, also offers the body, all of the structures in the body that Lorimer Moseley mentioned, some reassurance that the body is not in danger. The body is up and alert and moving. There is information that goes to the brain when we are moving, particularly bilaterally. We are moving our arms, our legs in this way that we do. The brain tracks that information and receives that as a sign of, well, we must be doing okay, we're moving, versus the information that the brain receives if we are curled over in, you know, what is described as kind of a classic fetal position. That is also information that the brain is tracking. One question to ask yourself in your own physical rehabilitation, whether you're in physical therapy or whether you have a personal trainer or you're going to go back to the gym in the, you know, as COVID hopefully shifts over and we are allowed to be able to do that safely. You want to ask yourself, how dangerous is this really? And again, that assurance of safety of what's happening in the spine, the structures of the spine, the openings for the nerves, the discs, all of that, you'll want a good evaluation with a spine specialist if that is the source of pain that you have. Or if you are working with a rheumatologist, you will want to ask questions about, okay, is the pain I'm having connected to anything concerning or damaging right now? And again, the whole idea that we're trying to work with here is we're trying to uncouple, with appropriate medical evaluation and expertise here, we're trying to uncouple the idea or the experience really from pain and all of those pain alarms from threat or danger to the tissues right now. So asking how dangerous is this really is not how painful is it. It may in fact be quite painful, but pain and danger, pain and threat to the tissues are not the same thing. So a regular fitness routine for any human creature would involve kind of the standard package of strengthening exercises for core muscles and other muscles, stretching exercises, which is a wonderful thing to do after your muscles have been warmed up and worked out, and aerobic exercises. You know, getting the heart rate up to the point where the blood is obviously circulating. Of course, the organ that also benefits tremendously from aerobic exercise is the one between our ears. Mechanically pumping blood and good nutrition and circulation to the brain is essential. We think it also is protective against neurodegeneration of cognitive function later on. So some of the disorders that include a component of dementia. So aerobic exercise can be very protective of that. We also know that exercise is excellent for the immune system for a number of reasons. But if we think about the cardiac system has an active pump in our heart, right? We don't have to be exercising for our heart to be beating and our blood to be circulating, thank goodness. But the lymphatic system, that is a significant part of our immune system, does not have an active pump necessarily, as I understand it. It's pumped passively. And so one of the ways that lymph is moved throughout the body is with movement, with exercise. So the lymph system being able to help the immune system function as we begin to move it. If it has been a significant amount of time since you have done strengthening exercises or exercise, or if this is in rehabilitation of persistent pain and you want some expertise, I think it can be very, very good to get some guidance, provided that your guidance is coming from someone who understands how persistent pain works and who understands that if you've had a good, thorough physical examination with appropriate imaging as need be, and an examination with an expert who can tell you, yes, pain is there and pain is unpleasant or whatever it is for you, but you are not going to cause damage with regular exercises, regular stretching and strengthening. It's essential to have a physical therapist who understands that and gets that, or if you do have a personal trainer, to have somebody who really understands, and preferably somebody who knows, you know, some of the new neuroscience here with the explained pain material, that pain does not automatically mean threat to the tissues, okay? And if it's been a while since you've had a regular exercise or movement routine, knowing that this is ideally a journey, it's not an all or nothing process. What we talk about with persistent pain is the principle of gradual progress and graded exposure. Gradual progress and graded exposure. Why is that so important? Part of why that's so important is that if pain is persistent, remember, if the central nervous system is going to be overprotective, it's going to be very attuned to more possible threat or possible danger. It can also mean that movements that we did not find uncomfortable before, or amounts of exercise, even walking, that were not painful for us before, might be. So what we want to do is make gradual increases and gradual additions to movement, sort of going underneath the threshold of what would ordinarily flare our pain. So, and we'll talk specifically about how to do that and what that means. So that assurance of safety piece, whether it's from a good spine physician or physician assistant or a good physical therapist, is one of the biggest SIMs that you can have, right? Hopefully very reassuring to have somebody look at your imaging and examine you and say, you know, we know that your pain is real. We know that you're not happy with your level of pain or you wouldn't be here. And regular exercise routines, regular lifting, bending, you're not going to cause harm if you do those things. Hopefully, that can be one of the biggest assurances of safety. So pain can be painful, but it does not have to mean, uh-oh, something is wrong or I'm hurting myself. Because what's the normal response if we move and we have the belief, uh-oh, something is wrong, I must be hurting myself? We'll stop moving, okay? And the more that we stop moving, the more deconditioning of the muscles there is, the more stiffness, right? The less circulation of all the blood and all the lymph. And we're reinforcing that experience to the brain of, I'm going to stop every time it hurts. Unfortunately, with an overprotective central nervous system, what we know is that it becomes more sensitized. We're going to receive pain faster and earlier than we did before, not because we're causing ourselves harm, but because that system is so overprotective. So questions that are really helpful for you to ask if you're not able to speak with a spine specialist, if you're speaking with your regular physician or your physical therapist or a physical trainer, some questions that might be helpful are, so aside from normal wear and tear, if I do normal everyday activity, am I going to cause new damage to my body, right? New damage. So normal everyday activity, self-care, personal hygiene, house chores, yard chores, cooking, cleaning, those kinds of things. Really good to ask about those things, really good to know about those things. Another question, aside from normal wear and tear, which again, all of us are walking upright against gravity over time, there is normal wear and tear for all bodies. That is, of course, part of being mortal and time. But aside from normal wear and tear, if I do a reasonable physical fitness program, am I going to cause new damage to my body? And hopefully they'll be able to tell you. And then finally, aside from normal wear and tear, are there any normal everyday physical activities or exercises that I should avoid because they'll cause new damage? Okay, new damage. One of the things that comes up, of course, because pain, especially pain that persists, is not just a physical experience in our body. It is an emotional experience. It is a cognitive experience. It can quickly become a conditioned experience that we expect. And we talked about the incredible power of what expectation can do and how our body can try to follow what our expectations are, for better and for worse. You know, if you are fortunate enough to be able to go and get a massage, there is a clear expectation, hopefully, of relaxation, even kind of going into that space, meeting with the massage therapist. The lighting is usually pleasant and dim. It usually smells good. The table is comfortable. We're already expecting to feel better and to feel relaxed, and the body is following that, right? If there are certain situations, certain activities that we are associating with pain, when we do those activities, we are having that, you know, quickly conscious, unconscious mind, body, spirit experience of, I'm expecting this to hurt and be painful. Those involve thoughts such as, I'm afraid of pain. Pain is fearful. Pain is scary because pain means something's wrong or I'm hurting myself. I'm afraid that pain always means that I'm hurting myself right now and there's damage. And of course, we're going to stop and not move in response to that, which is why the assurance of safety piece with trained medical professionals who know what they're talking about is so essential. If we're fearful that pain always means we're hurting ourselves, we're making it worse, whatever it is, the understandable human response to that is avoidance, right? We will avoid specific bodily movements, you know, range of motion with our neck or overhead reaching or looking. You know, we will not do certain movements because we're fearful that it's going to hurt. Unfortunately, changing the way that we move by not lifting or changing our gait or changing our position, our bodies respond to that. And in some cases, they respond with limited flexibility, deconditioning of muscles, limited range of motion. So then when we go to move again, we have that experience of, see, I did that and it hurts, so I'm going to stop doing that. We may, in fact, stop moving altogether. We may stop running, walking, stretching, exercising, working out, bending, lifting, doing any of that, right? And this is a very understandable, very human response to pain. Is not only overwhelming and very unpleasant, it's also scary, because the meaning I have with it is I'm hurting myself every time I move, and I must stop. Only in rare situations with certain disorders would that ever be the case. And again, I want you to consult with qualified physicians, spine specialists, rheumatologists, physical therapists, those folks who are able to look at your imaging and examine you and offer you the assurance of safety. So you can see that it is both understandable and completely human, but also can be a fairly quick process that if we're fearful of pain and it hurts every time we move, we'll stop moving pretty quickly, hoping that, all right, well, I'll move again when the pain goes away. But what happens, though, if the pain is not about an acute injury that just needs to heal, like a twisted, swollen ankle? What happens if it is persistent because of that overprotective central nervous system threat detection center? Is it going to go away with not moving? No. In fact, it's going to get worse. It's going to come faster and sooner with less activity than what we had before. And along the way, the body becomes deconditioning. And there is a strengthening of the notion of persistent pain as being kind of that closed feedback loop, right? And part of what would help, there is an illustration in one of these books that I wasn't necessarily able to get up here. So I'm going to draw something for you, lucky you. But let's see. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, here we have a whiteboard. Oh, good. Lucky you. My visual artistry skills are really great. This is just to kind of illustrate, and this is it's a famous poster illustration in the first Explain Pain book, and I'll do my best to kind of illustrate the mountain of pain both before and then after persistent pain, so you can get a visual concept of what we're talking about when less activity can result in more pain. So this is before pain, and what we have here, this is the threshold or the buffer of before you're going to hurt yourself doing a physical activity. Pain will come here, but you notice you have a lot of distance. There's a lot of room here in which you can engage in physical activity of whatever kind before pain comes and you want to stop and back off a little bit before you hurt yourself. You're going to have pain usually before you have injury. And this is another exercise that Lorimer Moseley will do. But if you squeeze your earlobe hard enough to have it hurt, or hard enough even to feel it, you're not hurting your tissues. You're receiving the pain information before the tissues are being harmed, right? So this is before persistent pain. And if I were kind of like Bob Ross, I would draw in a couple of little friendly trees here, but I'm not. So let's say at some point there is some sort of injury or some sort of pain generating event or experience or condition. Now, your buffer, so this buffer between when you are going to be having pain and when there's injury is much, 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 much larger. So in other words, it comes much sooner. So now maybe you can go up to here before pain comes, and you again are not nearly injuring yourself. What's happening here is that the size of this buffer has dramatically increased, so that the amount of physical movement, activity, stretching, etc., that it takes in order for the central nervous system to overprotect with pain is much less. Okay. Cognitively, though, we might have the experience of, you know, I used to do way more than this without any pain at all. Why all of a sudden am I doing this one small thing? Or I'm in the garden for an hour and then all of a sudden I'm in so much pain. Okay. Because the size of the buffer, because of the overprotective nature of the central nervous system in part, and the reorganization of how those messages are produced and how quickly they're produced has changed. So oftentimes what will happen in response to that is one of two kind of extreme patterns that we see. Either somebody stops moving completely. So somebody says, all right, never mind. I'm not going to move until it doesn't hurt anymore. I'm just not going to move. And then eventually they have to get up and move. Or the other idea is to say, I'm going to push past it. I'm just going to grit my teeth, and no matter how bad it hurts, I'm going to finish the task that I'm doing, or I'm going to mow the lawn or whatever. So they push way past it, right? What happens then is that the brain will over-respond by increasing the size of that buffer. So in other words, you are going to get pain usually sooner and faster and more loudly than you did before. It sounds like an unwinnable cycle. So what's the way out? I'm going to get out of the whiteboard again, and we will go back to the slides, because there is a way out. And it's a way out that works incredibly well. And that if you don't have a good physical therapist or somebody to work specifically with you on this, I think getting one is an excellent idea. The way out of this cycle of not moving at all, moving and then overdoing, flaring, going through the physiological experience of the flare, as well as the cognitive and the emotional experience of the flare, the meaning behind it, the meaning of I can't do that and I have to do that, or I should be able to do that because I used to be able to, or what will happen if I can't take care of myself, all of that. And then we respond to the pain flare usually by restricting movement, right? So then we're kind of doing this up, down, up, down. So the way out of that cycle, which again is so understandable and so human, nobody wants to have more pain, but the way out is gradual progress and graded exposure with movement. How do we do that? We do that with the rule of two. So what the rule of two means, and what it invites us to do, is to first of all do what we did at the start of this hour, which is to check in with the body and scan it regularly. In order for you to know kind of where your base pain level is, comfort level is, all of the somatic information, you're going to have to scan. Oftentimes, I would suggest, from the standpoint of stress and hydration and muscle stiffness, that you scan once an hour. It doesn't have to take 10 minutes. It can be quick. But in order for you to be able to assess and track pain, you've got to be scanning your body. Okay? So what the rule of two invites is just this. If you, for example, start the day at whatever your version of 4 is, and by the way, the numeric pain scale of, somewhere between 1 to 10, I don't know how helpful that is at all for patients who get asked that when they come in. I mean, I think it's possibly even irritating, because I just don't know what, if anything, it captures. So I'm going to put this out here with numbers, but if it also makes sense for you to have, qualities, it moves from irritating to, catastrophic. That would be pretty extreme. If you work better with colors, it moves from, slightly pink to bright red, for example. Then I would invite you to do that. because I don't know that, giving a number for pain, it depends on the day, it depends on where in the body you're feeling it. It depends on a number of different things. So the number thing may not be helpful, but whatever your internal scale is from, okay, this is my typical everyday pain to this is more than usual. What you want to do is notice that, and whatever your starting point is, for the sake of this rule of two concept, let's just say if you start out and you check in and you notice, yeah, I'd give it maybe a 4, whatever your 4 is, okay? What you want to do is go about your regular activity, your functional activity or your physical activity or both, and track and notice if the pain starts to change, if it starts to go up. And what the rule of two suggests to you is that if it goes up by 2, do something different, not necessarily stop, right? The instinct is, uh-oh, it hurts, I need to stop and completely quit moving. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe, if, first of all, it depends on the activity that you're doing. If you are bending over and raking, maybe it's just about standing, stretching, taking a brief break. If you're bending over a sink doing dishes, maybe it's about, stepping back, standing upright a little bit, stretching a little bit, rolling your shoulders. Or maybe it's about getting a stool and sitting down at the stool and doing that. Whatever adjustment or modification that you need, what you want is for the pain not to keep climbing, for it to stay and then go back down to where it was. Okay, so you're going to have to track that pretty closely. And sometimes that can happen with a postural change. Sometimes it can happen just with a body scan and the awareness that, oh, whew, I'm tensed up. If I just kind of breathe and relax, then it'll go back down a little bit. Sometimes it means that we're done with that activity for the day. And that can be the hard part cognitively and emotionally. If we have the previous experience and the expectation of ourselves and the cognitive belief of, I must get this done in one shot, I should be able to do this, I have always been able to mow the whole lawn in one day, I'm not stopping now, I have to get this done. Well, yes and no. If what will happen is another one of those cycles of, okay, pain is increasing, it's almost like we're trying to outrun it, right? Okay, I'm just going to grit my teeth and go for it, knowing full well, as I've heard many patients say, that, and then I paid for it for the next 2 days, or then I was down for the next day, or the next week even. It's that push, flare, restrict cycle that we're reinforcing. And every time we reinforce that, the central nervous system will respond by saying, okay, if you're really not listening, we're going to increase the size of the buffer. In other words, we're going to decrease the amount that you can do before pain will come. Pacing and the rule of two is absolutely essential in rehabilitation from persistent pain or with persistent pain. And it's probably one of the most frustrating concepts initially for folks who tell me, yeah, that's hard for me. I can't do that. I don't do that. Okay. But the way out of the pain, flare, catastrophe, restriction cycle is pacing in the rule of two. And I appreciate very much that it can be frustrating and that it can mean an entire reorganization of how you approach tasks. But think about it. Most of the time, if it's not actually a life and death importance, does the pace or the way in which we do certain activities or certain chores really matter enough that we're willing to reinforce persistent pain? Is somebody going to come to my house and pound on my door and yell at me because instead of mowing my whole front lawn, I split it up into a section and I did some, and then I went and sat down and had some lemonade? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. A lot of the conditioned patterns are based on our experiences of how we're used to doing things. okay? And some of that will change in response to pain. Some of it is based on the cognitive and emotional experiences of our role expectations that we have for ourselves or what others expect that we will do. An example of this will be in one of the classes that we were having in person, somebody remarked that a holiday was coming up and they were very worried about it and they were really stressed out about the holiday. And I, of course, said, tell me more. Holidays are supposed to be fun. And it turns out that this person had made the decision, not even really a decision, but was operating under the assumption based on past experience and based on past ability, by the way, that they personally, as one person, would be responsible for planning the meal, grocery shopping for everything. Obviously, this was pre-COVID, grocery shopping, preparing this elaborate 6 or 7 course holiday meal, getting everything set up, making it look beautiful, getting it served, and making sure 10 other people had a wonderful time. And I asked, where are you usually during this? And the response was, I'm usually in the kitchen cleaning up and feeling exhausted, and I'm so glad when all that's over. And now the thought of doing that with persistent pain is really, really daunting and really, really alarming. So the fear and the threat and the alarm is already there, and we haven't even started. And in that particular instance, I asked a lot of direct questions about, okay, so why are you solely in charge of something that sounds like it could take 10 people? And what would it mean to ask for help or to reorganize it differently, or to, what would it be like if that was different? And it hadn't been something that had occurred for this person that they might be able to delegate some of those activities, in part so that they wouldn't have a pain flare and then have 3 or 4 days of misery afterward, but in part so that their holiday could be enjoyable too. Because when I asked, okay, what are the values associated with the holiday? Why go to all of this work? The answer was, yummy food and time with loved ones. Wonderful. Do you get to do any of those things? No, I'm too busy to spend time with anyone. I'm too frazzled. I'm back in the kitchen cleaning, and I usually get to eat cold leftovers after it's done. Okay, so part of it is, if the value of a holiday really is about enjoying the food and spending time with others, we're going to have to reorganize the way that gets structured. But the past experience of, well, in the past, I've done all this and it's been fine. Well, maybe it wasn't fine. So pacing and the rule of 2, although a very different way of getting things done, does a couple of things. First of all, it allows us to do a bit each day instead of a lot one day and then nothing for the next 2 to 3 days. So that spiking, flaring, restricting cycle that we don't want. And then it doesn't reinforce that cycle to the central nervous system. It lets us take more frequent breaks in which we are scanning the body, checking the body, hydrating, breathing, stretching, paying attention to the muscles, okay? And believe it or not, here's an experiment that I would invite you to do. You will get more done in the long run, even though in that moment or that hour or that day, it might seem like less, and that might be really frustrating. So rather than saying, what are all the chores I'm going to do today? You might think about, okay, within this month, what are the things that I'm going to accomplish? My suspicion is, pacing in the rule of 2, you will be doing more each day that will accumulate over the long run than you would on the days where you grit your teeth and push through and then have to recuperate for a couple days. The other thing that you're doing, by the way, is slowly shrinking the size of that buffer and slowly increasing the number of minutes that you can be up and active and moving before pain climbs, okay? It also will demand of you, it will invite, it will demand connected mindful attention in everyday life to what's happening in your body and what's happening around you. And it's also not an easy thing to do. It's going to bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings and some of the barriers that are both internal and social, right? So the thoughts that come up, or the fears that come up about, I'll get less done, it's just wrong, I didn't grow up in a family where you ever sat down and took a break, what will other people think of me, what will my spouse think of me if I'm sitting with my feet up drinking lemonade and petting the dog instead of out doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing. I feel really, really guilty about being taken care of. It will, in fact, bring all of that up. And that's part of the process. And then we will talk later in future sections of this class. What do you do with all of the emotional barriers and the emotional thoughts and beliefs that come up for us based on our own experiences of ourselves in the past and where we want to be, and then how to navigate that with others. If other people are used to you being physically able and capable of doing all of these things, and suddenly you're needing to adjust, slow down, stop, or recalibrate that, that can be a difficult conversation if somebody doesn't understand what you're doing with pacing and the rule of two, and what you're doing with neurobehavioral rehabilitation. And that also points to another piece about working with pain. For the most part, unless we have some evidence that there's been an injury, or we are in a cast or ambulating with a cane or a walker, for the most part, pain is invisible. So people who know you really well might be able to see, physically when discomfort is there and present. But otherwise, pain can be invisible. And as such, it can be hard for others to see and understand. And other people might have judgments about us as we're doing or not doing things, or we might be fearing the judgments of others. But remember, simply because pain is not visible to others, if imaging doesn't directly show what specifically is generating pain, if what's happening really is that centralized overprotective nervous system, it doesn't matter. Our experience is still our experience. And part of this rehabilitation process is relearning how to connect with ourselves, connecting with our boundary, being able to pace our activity, and not push ourselves past the point of discomfort because of the shoulds and the musts, whether those are coming internally or outside of us. So specific strategies for increasing fitness and activity levels, reflecting on value-driven action plans. So that was an example of that was when I asked the class participant about, okay, there's this whole holiday coming up, but what's really the value and the meaning behind that? Well, it's two things. It's yummy food and time with loved ones. Great. So how to accomplish those values and focus action plans around that, okay? And how to have a functional goal with something that is necessary to do or something that you really love doing. Forming an intention can be quite helpful. Keeping an activity log, if you're a person that enjoys tracking progress, great, do that. If you're a person for whom you will have negative self-talk or beat yourself up, in other words, about I didn't track and I didn't do it and now I feel even worse about myself, don't do it. It's not worth ingraining the stress around this activity. And the thought patterns that can be helpful or unhelpful for us will be the topic of the 7th talk, thoughts and pain. Having a buddy system can be helpful in a couple of ways. One, we might be motivated to go do something with someone else because we told them we would, or spending time with them if they are a sim, if they're a sim for us, can be lovely and wonderful, and we will move and enjoy ourselves, and that can be better. And your buddy can be, a dog or a llama or a pig or whoever you want to have. And laughter, laughter and social support as we're doing this, I think, can be so important. Gradual progress and graded exposure. I can't say enough about how important this is, how important it is to do that. Pacing and the rule of two. We've talked quite a lot about that. Picking some sort of reward for yourself that is achievable and is doable and is high value to you. So an example of that might be, if finances allow, okay, for every 10 hours of exercise that I complete, I am going to get a half an hour chair massage. Cool. That might be great. I mean, exercise, hopefully eventually becomes its own reward because it feels good and all of the mood benefits to it, and it feels good to move the body. But if not, having a valued reward for changing behavior, because changing behavior can be difficult, especially when we are working with some avoidance and some fear and some pain. Speaking of which, sitting with and working with the fear and the avoidance of activity. And time management, setting ourselves up to succeed rather than setting ourselves up to fail with increasing fitness and activity, right? Being realistic about what our time schedule is. For me, I know that if I intend to exercise in a day, it's best done first thing, because my motivation usually to do it later in the evening is less, unless it's like a mellow walk with the dog. So to set myself up to succeed requires doing that in the morning, which requires a little bit of advanced planning. So having everything I need kind of laid out and ready so that I don't have to think about it. I can just grab it, put it on, and go before I'm even actually technically awake. So if you see me out there walking around and I don't seem like I'm awake, you'll know that I'm managing my time. And assertiveness. Assertiveness, not necessarily in the traditional sense, but the boundary setting and the self-compassion that we need when we're navigating that with others. So if we have a family member or a spouse or someone who says, why is only half of the lawn mowed? We might be able to say, because I'm pacing and doing the rule of two, and that's where I stopped, and I'm taking a break. Is that easy to do? It depends on who we're working with. But remember, your particular boundary, your particular needs, and what your pace is, and how you are rewiring your own brain are not dependent on what other people expect you to do or what we did in the past. Okay. So in some cases, it does mean kind of relearning to people, hey, that's not going to be something that I'm able to do, and negotiating for what else can we do instead. For many people, for example, sitting in the car for an 8-hour-long road trip feels and is very daunting and very difficult. So instead of saying, okay, I'm not going to go, is there a middle ground there? Is there a way to say, if we broke it up into a couple of days or went somewhere closer, I could probably do that, and that would be okay for me. So, but again, part of that depends on our mindful awareness, moment to moment, day to day, of where we are and what we need, and that it's okay to ask for and stand for what our needs are. In fact, it's essential, whether we have pain or not. If you are a person for whom tracking is satisfying, in other words, it's a sim, I would say use one of these logs. If there's any anxiety, avoidance, guilt if you don't do it, stress associated with it at all, please don't do it. In other words, if tracking is a sim and helps you, great. If tracking is a dim, or if you're not sure, don't do it. But there are a lot of different ways that you can track movement. There are online apps and phone apps that you can use. MyFitnessPal, I think, is a free one where you can track movement and you can track food. Fitbit, of course, is not free, but if you get a Fitbit, that can also help you track everything pretty much, from your heart rate to your steps to your food to your water, all those kinds of things. And again, what I would say is, if it's helpful and motivating and fun for you, great, do it. If it's a sim, if it's a dim, or if you're not sure, don't necessarily grab a hold of that and do that. You want to set yourself up to succeed, okay? So we move again to the functional goal planner tracking. And if you need a reference, page 227 of this big blue book has a page about goals, creating them, and then also tracking them. And I wanted to see if this is where we're talking about SMART goals. Okay, maybe not. So with functional goal setting, again, it's something that you are physically doing. So it could be, I want to get my garden beds prepped in time for planting. It could be, my example last time was, I want to be able to walk the dog around the block twice a day. Great. And that's a pretty clear, pretty simple one. It really is a matter of, okay, did I do it? Yes or no? How do I feel about that? And then what do I want to add? Maybe I want to double that and say, I'm going to walk the dog for 10 minutes twice a day, and just track and see where that's going. If there's one skill, when we talk about skill development, if there's one skill or one practice that I would strongly, strongly recommend that you start experimenting with, it's pacing and the rule of 2. Those things together, first of all, tuning into the body scanning to know kind of where pain and discomfort might be moment to moment, being able to assess, being able to move, and then notice when that changes, and then being able to respond in a compassionate manner and doing that quickly rather than blocking it out and not being in the body, or noticing that pain is creeping up and so we run faster to try to get ahead of it, right? I would encourage you to try pacing and the rule of 2. Those two pieces together, along with the body scanning and just quickly checking in with oneself, are the skills and the practices that over and over and over, when people come back and say, this is what helped in this 8-week course, okay? This is the practice that I looked back at, maybe not quickly, but over time, and looked back and realized I was moving again, I was walking again, I was doing more again with less or not more pain. Pain staying the same or going down, and feeling much better about life. It's pacing in the rule of 2. It's pacing in the rule of 2. All of the information hopefully is helpful and gives you a background about the neuroscience and the biology behind why, but pacing and the rule of 2 of activity is absolutely essential. So if you're going to add a functional goal, make sure it includes pacing and the rule of 2. And if your skill development action plan doesn't have an item on it, you guessed it, pacing and the rule of 2. Okay? And see page 227 for more information. So we're back to SIMs and DIMs. And last time I invited you to share things that you do that are absolute SIMs. Things that you love to do, are able to do, used to do, and would like to do again that are SIMs. For me, of course, it's going to be something related to our dog, or kayaking. Kayaking is definitely a sim for me. So for next time, you are going also on a sim search, because it really is about looking for sims in day-to-day life, and making sure that you are adding those back in if they have not been a focus or if they have been put on a shelf a little bit. And so for next week, it's things that you say. So things that you say to other people can certainly be a sim or a dim, right? But things that you say to yourself. about how you coach yourself. Here's what I mean by that. If I'm stressed out, for example, and I feel like I'm overwhelmed and I'm not handling things very well, there is a huge difference in my relationship with myself and what happens if I say something to myself like, oh my gosh, I'm falling apart, I'm losing it, I'm such a wreck. Versus if I notice what's happening, notice I feel overwhelmed, it's a mind, body, spirit experience, and I say to myself, wow, I'm having a really hard time right now. I'm having a hard time right now. Okay, here's the difference. The one relationship that we have total control over, at least in the human mortal sense, the one relationship that we have control over is our relationship with ourselves. And those kinds of consistent, almost like hypnotic suggestions that we're giving ourselves about how we are doing in the world are really powerful. So the things that we say to ourselves, the things that we say about ourselves, how we even describe ourselves to others, whether it's about pain or something else, can either be SIMs or DIMs. So I would invite you to go on a SIM search and look for things that you say that immediately are grounding and affirming for you. And notice if there is self-talk that comes up that is critical and not as compassionate, and we'll work directly with that too. Because again, the language that we use about our pain and our rehabilitation from pain is really powerful, okay? There's a big difference physically, emotionally, mentally in saying, well, yeah, I walked around the block, but it doesn't compare at all to what I was doing last year at this time, so why bother? Okay, versus saying, yeah, I walked around a block, and that's more than I've done in 6 months. Cool, and it felt okay. Pain did not go up by 2, and I was pacing. Great, I'm going to stop there, you know? There's a difference. And it's not about, again, trying to pretend that we feel something we don't feel. It is about noticing if we are in a pleasant relationship with ourselves, or if we're in an unpleasant, potentially even toxic relationship with ourselves. Because that relationship, we can do something about that. And much more to come on that later. But it can be an important part of how we coach ourselves through reconditioning with pain when we're worried about if it's going to hurt or not. And of course, I would leave you always with a little bit of humor. Poor chicken talking to Uncle Freud. I've got so many phobias, I could barely leave the house today. Luckily, I've also got a phobia about the house caving in on me. By the way, I don't actually think that fears and phobias are funny. However, a little bit of humor about life and where we are, I think, can be helpful. So hopefully you thought so too. So that's it for this section on physical reconditioning and pain. Go well. Enjoy some spring weather, hopefully. Stand, stretch. Remember just to check in with the body, do a little bit of body scan, mindful self-awareness, noticing pain, but also just noticing how the body is doing. Are we hungry? Are we thirsty? How are we traveling in the body? And pacing in the rule of 2. Pacing in the rule of 2. Thank you so much. Take care. I'll see you next time.